Hola a todos, mi nombre es Alfonso Amat y yo soy responsable del desarrollo del ecosistema emprendedor para Latinoamérica en Amazon Web Services. Y hoy tenemos la suerte de contar con una persona que yo tengo profunda admiración por las cosas que ha investigado, escrito y hecho. Y por eso voy a dejar que ella misma se presente. Meghan Stevenson Krause es una persona admirable y que me encantaría que nos hagas una intro. Meghan, how are you? Thank you for joining us. I was just mentioning that I would be very interested in having you introduce yourself and then have a fire chat conversation where we can share anecdotes about your life and your passions.
Thank you, Alfonso. Well, I am currently the director of Inca Ventures, a fintech-focused early-stage VC fund based in Lima, Peru. And I got there in a rather roundabout way. My background, actually, I studied international relations. I did a master's in human rights, and I thought I was going to go to the State Department.
Okay.
Instead, I ended up moving. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay. So instead of going to the State Department, I decided to do a master's in human rights and ended up moving to San Francisco, where I worked for a human rights nonprofit. But of course, the thing about San Francisco is that everywhere you go, you meet people who are involved in tech and startups and venture capital. And so, that got me very interested in learning more about what was venture capital. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about sort of that journey later. So I'll just leave that as a teaser.
Okay. So now you are in Peru. You run a venture capital, but actually you come from a very interesting background. Let's start there. So I know that you did an investigation on Sesame Street. Why don't we start on that? And I'm sure we can link it to something that I'm really concerned, and I think we share this passion, that is the importance of diversity. So what is this about Sesame Street?
I love that you brought this up. Yes, I've been a huge fan of Sesame Street for most of my life. First as a child watching it, but I had this really profound moment actually my senior year of high school when a woman who had been a graduate of my high school came to speak to us. She worked at Sesame Street at the time, and she shared with us that globally, Sesame Street actually had all these goals. So for example, in Egypt, Sesame Street worked to empower girls and women. In South Africa, they worked to advance awareness about AIDS. In Bangladesh, it was around general hygiene. And of course, everywhere they're also focused on closing the education gap, which is their general goal. And I came home and I'm going like, this is a whole new side of Sesame Street. I had no idea that there was all this, honestly, a lot of research and consideration and psychology behind what they do. And so fast forward to, I'm in my master's program. I'm studying a master's in human rights, and I'm thinking about ways in which I could, well, actually, what really happened is I watched a movie that changed my life, which was not related to Sesame Street, but it got me thinking about the ways in which visual media can be used to build bridges.
And what movie was it?
The movie was called Ajami. So it's spelled Ajami, and it takes place in the Jaffa neighborhood in Tel Aviv. It actually was a joint, like the script was co-written by a Jewish, Israeli, and Palestinian. It was co-directed by them and co-produced by them. And all the actors were not actors. So, and they were actually people who lived in that neighborhood. So there's actually Ajami is a neighborhood in Jaffa, which is part of Tel Aviv. And the thing that really impacted me was the story is told in chapter format, but you don't realize until about 2/3 of the way through the movie that the chapters are out of order. And the way that you realize this is because you see something very crucial to one of the characters' development happen that I, at least as a viewer, had made a very different assumption about what had happened with that character until I saw the other side of it. And all of a sudden I'm going, oh my God, I made all these assumptions about this one character and they were totally not true. And so I got me thinking, like, we do this on a daily basis. I didn't sleep that night. I'm telling you, Alfonso, like I started writing to all my professors. I was like, has there been anyone, I started researching like film and social justice, or not just social justice, but like conflict transformation. We talk a lot about conflict resolution, but conflict transformation being the act of like, how do you get beyond the resolution of the conflict?
Yeah.
I couldn't find very many resources on this. And so I thought, well, gosh, I'd like to start investigating that. I'd like to do that research. I realized that doing it, originally I really wanted to look at the age of like 18 to 21. I particularly wanted to focus on Israel-Palestine. And the reason why I've always been very interested in that conflict is because my dad is Jewish, my mom is Christian. They sent me to a Muslim preschool, and I also went to a Christian elementary school.
We call it cambalache, a mixture of everything. Yeah.
Yes, a mixture of everything. What is the word? Cambalache?
Yes. How do you spell it? Like, cambalache. I wrote it in the it's Cambalache, and it's when it's a mix of cultures and everything. So you're in this cambalache, you're in this mixture,
Yes.
and what happened?
And I realized that in order to do like a proper investigation on film as a whole, and particularly looking at the ages of 18 to 21, and the reason I started to say the reason why I wanted to look at that age group is because in Israel at 18, most actually in reality it's about 50%, but people think that it's more. But Jewish Israelis go to the army. And so that's a really crucial point in their society and in their growth, but it's also a crucial point in anyone's growth, right? Around 18 is the time when we start to self-reflect and perhaps distance ourselves a little bit from the way that our parents raised us. And at that same point in time, Palestinian Israelis are going off to university. So they're going to school, they're continuing going to school, but the Jewish Israelis, their counterparts, are going to the army, and there's this split that happens in the society. And so I wanted to look at that through the lens of film. I realized that was like a PhD topic. So there was no way that I could do that during my master's. And I started thinking back, and I remembered, this presentation that had been done on Sesame Street my senior year of high school. And I thought, now that might be something. Looking at the ways in which children consume media and the role that can play in promoting positive positive perception of the self and good relations with the other in which they're in conflict.
So now you're bringing that through venture capital, no? So in a way, you realize that the same type of transformation in society needs to take place. And now you are where the decisions are taken in startups. Let me share something with you. At Amazon, we have this division that is focused on startups. And we fully believe in the value of diversity. Actually, we have full divisions dedicated to look and how to identify and help underrepresented minorities. And as a personal passion, I totally agree that we need to do a lot on that. And I am very intrigued, and given that I understand that you're fully focused on this from Inca, what do you see? And the first question is, and I want your knowledge about this, is why do you think that diversity is important for a startup?
Yeah. So if you don't mind, before we actually get into that, I'd like to just sort of briefly define what we mean when we're talking about diversity and inclusion. I think it's really helpful.
Please.
about
There's
leaders.
already,
Yeah.
you're right, because there's already a bias on that. When in the moment we think in diversity, maybe we're just thinking one specific part, and you're right. It's like the movie you was mentioning before. It's important first to see what are we talking about. So thank you. Yes, what is diversity?
Yeah. So, I think like diversity is really about reflecting all of the differences that we have in our world around us, right? In our community. So I think there's the classic like dance example. Since we're talking about venture capital, I'm going to try and amend it to a venture capital scenario. And so it's basically it's hiring analysts and associates from diverse backgrounds, from backgrounds that are
Yep.
they're reflective of the community in which we're in.
Yep.
I think, then the next step is inclusion, right? And
Hmm.
so inclusion is having a diverse team of general partners and an investment committee, right? So that's
Hmm.
more about sort of the full engagement of those individuals from diverse backgrounds
Hmm.
at all levels of the organization. But then there's equity, and I think often we mistake equity and equality, or we use them interchangeably, and I think that's also an important distinction to make. Equality is really about sort of, when you're distributing resources, you give everyone the same amount of resources, no matter what.
Hmm.
Equity is about giving people the resources that according to their needs. So, there's that famous picture of like an adult, a child, and sometimes there's also included a person in a wheelchair that are trying to watch a sports game over a tall fence. And all three of them have one box that they can stand on. And so, the adult doesn't really need a box. He can see over the fence. The kid needs more than one box. They're barely still like, can't really see over the fence. And the person in the wheelchair can't get up on the box, right? So that's equality because they all have the same resources no matter what. But equity would be giving them the resources that they need. So maybe it's giving the kid 2 or maybe 3 boxes to stand on, and not giving the adult any because they don't need it, and giving a ramp to
Hmm.
the person in the wheelchair so that they can get up to see. And so the way we think of that when it comes to venture capital and investing in startups is really thinking about who's in the room and who's not in the room, and how can we create hiring processes within our funds and in the startups in our portfolio, and also evaluation processes and sort of sourcing strategies that try to attract and find those people who are not yet in the room, and acknowledging also some of the why are they not there. So for example, something that happens a lot in venture capital funds is um, oftentimes internships are unpaid. Well, if you're not paying an intern, which I totally understand, there's we there may be some large funds, but the majority of funds in Latin America are actually, they don't have huge budgets. I think that's something a lot of people don't understand about venture capital. It's not like we have that large budgets. We're working on a 2% management fee, right? So depending on the amount of assets under management depends on the budget we have. And so it's understandable that often interns are not paid. But if they're not being paid, who are we attracting, right? Like
Yeah. Only
who
the people that can live without a salary. Yes, it's an immediate bias. Yes, it's excellent. Yes, I understand. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So I don't remember. You were asking me, I think, about how this sort of applies within the lens of startups.
I was trying to understand because what happened to me in the metaphor of the boxes is that in a way we have this adult that we tend to think in them as someone that okay he's fully empowered. Then we have the man in the wheelchair that is having a problem. He can't move as the adult, and then we have the kid. And when I think in diversity, the problem with that metaphor is that in a way I like the idea of the box, but on the other hand means that someone is better in a way because he can stand and he can see better. And I would try to find, I would love to, I know, for example, that teams that are diverse, and when I say in this specific case diverse, is that if in the founders you have a male and a female, the percentage of success of that startup is higher than if it's just males or just females. And when I look at that, immediately I remove the bias of saying someone is better if it's a male, if it's a female. No, actually, diversity is the value in itself. Uh, and the first thing that I know that I read in some of the sites that you wrote and all that is that there are some specific statistics about this. The power, the return investment on diversity. So when someone is investing, he might not be thinking, oh, I want to help everyone. I want to do a good business. Or even if they want to save the world, seems that it's a good business to be diverse. So I know that I want to get your insights on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, one of my biggest pet peeves is when people talk about, well, I don't want to lower the bar. And it's like, I don't know, do you think hiring me is lowering the bar?
Horrible.
Yeah. So like you said, we have some great statistics on why diversity makes sense, and sort of like for business. And sadly, all the statistics that I have are for the US, but I do hope that we'll get some for Latin America soon. So to start with, let's look at the makeup of our investors. So we have about 6%, according to the National Venture Capital Association in the US, 6% of venture partners are either Black or Latinx. It's about 3% each.
Okay.
And when you get to women, you actually see something very interesting happen. About 45% of the workforce in venture capital are women.
Okay.
However, when you look at the investment team, it drops down to 21% are women. And when you look at partners, it goes down to 14%.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a huge drop, right?
Yes.
And something else, yeah. And something else that's very interesting is that, so I started digging into the data. There's a great dashboard that they've done, that the NVCA has done, where you can look at some of this information. And I started digging into some of the other roles to see like, well, where is there must be somewhere where there's like the opposite phenomenon happening. And it's in investor relations, operations, and marketing. 75% of the professionals in the venture capital space who are working on investor relations, operations, and marketing are women.
Okay.
Which is, it's good that there are a lot of women that are there, right? Like it's almost 50-50, but it's not, when they're not part of the investment process, I think that's where we see problem come up, which is pattern matching, right? So there was a great longitudinal study done by Harvard University. It was over 20 plus years of data of venture capital investing in the US. And they showed that when you add just 10% more female partners to a team, the fund increases its internal rate of return by 1.5 percentage points. Now, that sounds small, but I think that most of our audience members,
it's a lot.
It's right. It's not actually.
It's a lot
if you
of money.
know it's not a lot. I mean, it is a lot. Yes.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about like an average IRR for a fund over 7 to 10 years is somewhere around 14%. So you're basically saying add more female partners and you can increase your returns by about 10%, which is very significant.
Yeah.
Yeah. And something else that report talks about is the ways in which our biases play in to how we fund, we as a sector, right? I mean, so we tend to pattern match for gender, race, school, even, I mean, there's people joke that so many VCs have gone to get their MBAs from Stanford, Harvard, Penn, but it's not just a joke, it's a fact. And certainly, this study actually showed that can have a huge influence on who venture capitalists fund. And so the interesting thing is, right, like I mentioned some of the statistics as far as the diversity on the investment side. We see when we go to the other side of the table, right, and we look at the entrepreneurs that they're investing in, that those numbers are uncannily similar, which kind of shows us, again, this kind of pattern matching that we do, right? So only 20% of VC funding goes to ethnically diverse founding teams. Despite the fact that only 20% is going to them, that means 80% is going to all white teams. However, these ethnically diverse founding teams, and this was a report by the Kaufman Fellows that I believe was released earlier this year, those ethnically diverse founding teams, they return on average 30% more than all white founding teams.
30%?
Again, yes, 30%.
Okay. That was a surprise. Wow.
Yeah. And, you know,
only with that, we can finish the conversation here. We can finish the conversation. Okay, we're done.
Yeah.
Come on. 30%. Then you have a 10% extra. Come on. We've done the case, but let's continue. But this should be enough. Okay.
Yeah. So remember I mentioned that about 14% of venture partners are women? Well, only about 12% of funding goes to teams with at least one female founder. And that's only 3% goes to teams that are all female teams, all female founding teams.
Okay.
And that situation, and this is where we have to recognize, again, this is data coming from the US. And so we also have data looking at the amount of funding that's going to Latinx women, female founders, and Black female founders. Mm-hmm. And it gets even worse. It's like, hold on for a second. Hold on for a second. 0.32% of funding goes to Latinx female founders. And 0.0006% of funding goes to Black female founders.
Oh,
okay. Yeah. Despite this, we know that female founders, they invest each dollar invested in them better. They get, I believe it's 78% revenue for every dollar invested, female founders generate, as opposed to all male founding teams, which only generate 31 cents on the dollar. So
wow,
that's more than 2x.
More than twice. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
And female founding teams also generate over a 5-year period 10% more revenue, higher revenues than all male teams. So
okay. So that I think we got the case. But you mentioned something very, very important. You mentioned this is the data from the US. We need information. We need data from LATAM. What do we need to do to get data in LATAM? I know now you've been already in Peru 1 year.
Yes.
What do we do? What do we need? How do we help you to get that? We need that information and we need to start taking decisions on that. How we do that?
Well, so I'm glad you asked. I've actually been working on an initiative called Inclusive X to do just that. So I'm working together with 2 partners who also are in the venture capital sector. Together, we cover, together with us and our advisors that we've been recruiting, we cover most of the region. And our goal is to start with just that, with the data, because if we don't measure it, we can't change it. Because when I shared some of those statistics with you, right, you could see it's like, oh, wow, there's a problem here. We have an opportunity and we're missing it by not investing in these founders. And by also not having more people on the teams of venture capital funds that are from diverse backgrounds, right? To be able to see those opportunities. So I think that, a first step is to measure it. I know that we've got 3 sort of associations that are putting together this event where we are today. And so I'd love to be able to count on their support to gather this data from the funds that are part of their communities. I know it's something that, we're based in Peru. We've been talking with PACAP, the Peruvian Venture Capital Association, and Seed Association about this, and it's something that they're very keen to support. I do happen to be the VP of the board of PACAP.
Just it so happens.
All of my colleagues on the board also understand and appreciate the importance of this. And I think that part of that is also amplifying the conversation a bit, right? Like going beyond gender. From what I've been seeing in the region, and again, I've only been living in the region for a year. But what I see so far is that the conversation has really been generated around women. And that's super important, right? Like there's still a lot of work to be done to have more women in VC. But it's not enough. It's important, but not sufficient, right? And so we need to be thinking about diversity more broadly. And so with InclusiveX, we're thinking about it as we're looking at gender, LGBT, and LGBTQIA. We're looking at ethnicity, socioeconomic class, education, and disability.
Okay, and do we have, I understand that this is data that we will need for Latin America, but if we go to the US, for example, if we move out of the minorities that we were talking before, is there any other data about that minorities and their impact in startups?
Very few. But one of the organizations that is working on gathering that data is called Diversity VC. They started about 3 years ago in the UK. And they are just starting in the US as well. In fact, I think it was last year they released their first report on diversity in startups in the US. And we're actually partnering with them to be able to learn from their experience. They've been doing this now already for 3 years, and to be able to bring that to the region. So,
and do they share the results? Is something that we can dig in?
Yes, absolutely. Their Twitter is a great resource. I believe it's just at Diversity VC. And then their website, diversity.vc, is a great resource as well. And all their reports are available there.
Okay, brilliant. So sorry, I interrupted because I thought it was very powerful. But let's go back to Latin America. So you are going to do this report. This report will look at, let's see if I understood. First, data.
Yeah.
Who is investing, on who they're investing, how they're investing, and all that. Okay. Yeah. And once we have the data, how can we help to improve the situation?
It's a great question. So we're looking at it is we have a couple different approaches to this, right? So one thing is that based on conversations, so over the winter, South America, I'm still oriented towards...
Which winter? You're in Peru, I'm in Argentina, some of the people are listening are from Brazil, and some people are in Mexico, on the other side of the Ecuador. So when you say, let's go to month in the year.
Okay. Over the course of June, July, and August.
Okay. Winter, in my case, yes.
Okay. I spoke with about 16, 18 different investors across the region to try and get a sense of how they think about these things, right? How are they thinking about diversity and inclusion in their portfolios and in their work? And overwhelmingly, the majority of the people I spoke with said, yes, we think this is so important. We're really not sure how to go beyond gender, but we know we want to. And that they're really looking for resources to be able to incorporate diversity and inclusion practices into their evaluation of their startups, as well as in, let's say like diversity KPIs in their portfolio maintenance, right? And supporting their portfolio companies in this. And something that I think our audience knows this, but VC funds are startups too, right? So, I mentioned earlier, we have limited resources. And so something that we're looking at is developing some templates to try to make this really simple and easy for funds to start implementing, right? So templates for a diversity and inclusion policy that can be sort of plug and play for funds and early stage startups, because again, we know and recognize that time and resources are scarce, especially with early stage startups. Also sort of some templates for diversity KPIs and for an evaluation metric that incorporates diversity and inclusion. And so that's one side. Another sort of like the myth of the there's no diversity in the pipeline. And that goes both in terms of like startup pipeline and also talent, right? From the startup pipeline, we're looking at things like, let's do office hours for diverse founders and working with other nonprofits in the region that have been doing this work already, right? There are community organizations that have been working within let's say, like Afro-Colombian or indigenous populations are on entrepreneurship. And so it's about just sort of like tapping in. And on the side of the talent pool, Diversity VC, this is one of the reasons that we're so excited to partner with them. They developed a program called Future VC, which is I believe it's 13 weeks program that is a combination of, usually you're placed in an internship in a fund that's a paid internship, with programming to support in terms of like all the things you need to know about how to work in VC. And so
Interesting.
this past year, because of the pandemic, they actually opened it up globally, and they had over 500 participants from I think it was 19 or maybe even 20 plus countries around the world, including several that were from Latin America. So we are very excited to be able to, bring a program like that to Latin America to help when it comes to the talent pipeline. So those are some of the ways in which we're looking at addressing it. And something that we would love, is as we launch with the survey, we're also going to be asking investors to sign a pledge to that they recognize the importance of diversity and inclusion, and that they pledge to incorporate some of these practices.
Okay, so Megan, eons ago, I think it was like a couple of months before the pandemic started, I was with Juan Giner in New York, and he mentioned that one of the things that doesn't help in diversity is that males and females, we are biased that, for example, when a female founder pitches, we're tougher than when a male pitch. I, of course, when he said that, I said, no, it can't be. And then I started to ask female founders that I know, and I asked them, share with me how the interviews go. And they started to share the type of questions they got. And then they said the same. I meet with like 100 startups per month. And I started to talk with founders, males, and ask them about their questions. And suddenly I found that it was true. But I don't know uh, how to undo that. Seems that by some reason we are doing tougher questions to females. I am starting to see that it's true, but I don't know how to undo that. I was listening to your answer about the templates and all that. I really like it, but I wonder if there's any way in the Sesamo-like style of bringing something that will impact in everyone. Say, look, we are not being fair with female founders. What should we do?
It's a really tough question, and I want to emphasize that I am not necessarily a diversity and inclusion expert. I'm on a journey. I'm on the path of educating myself. I feel I'm re-educating myself constantly. But some of the practices that I've seen work in other situations. So first of all, what you say is absolutely true, right? It's the classic risk and reward. Women tend to be female founders tend to be asked about like mitigating risk, versus male founders
Exactly.
tend to about sort of like maximizing opportunity. And actually, there's so I saw Jimena, the founder of Promoteo, pitch a few years ago while she was pregnant, and I was so amazed. I got so excited. It's like I've never seen a female founder pitch while pregnant. And recently, I had the opportunity to talk with her, and I told her like just how amazing I had found that to be, and quite frankly, very empowering, right? Like, I think that so often there's a lot of, it's not accepted. And particularly if a woman is pregnant and she's fundraising, it can often be like, oh, I don't know if we want to fund you right now, because what about, maternity leave, or, are you going to disappear from the startup? So yeah, it's a huge issue. To the extent that's possible, some things that I've seen work are, this might sound funny, but mindfulness. Like a moment of mindfulness before going into the meeting, and grounding oneself. So it's something that I've done and I've seen done mostly when it comes to reviewing applications. But I think that the general idea behind it is that it helps us to sort of forget about what else is going on around us and really be in the moment of what we're seeing. We can also just ask ourselves, something that and actually I'm curious. I don't know. Have you ever asked yourself what would a woman do in this situation?
Frankly, no. And it's a good thing to do.
Yeah. I ask myself constantly, what would a guy do in this situation? And if I
Interesting.
think that a guy would take the opportunity, would jump at it, I'm way more likely to say yes and
Interesting.
go on board, even if I maybe originally had some kind of doubts. And so I think that it can also help us to try and just sort of think about, okay, wait, that question that I just asked, like, should I have asked, would I have asked that to a guy? Would I have asked that to a male founder? And another thing that is very beneficial is to have, when possible, diverse people at the table, right? Like on the investor side. So,
Yeah.
if you have a woman on your team, include her in the meeting. Now,
Okay.
it gets complicated because of power structures, right? If the only females on your team are analysts or associates, they may or may not feel comfortable speaking up and saying something in opposition to what a partner has said.
Okay.
So that also comes down to the culture that you create in the fund and all of that.
But what I heard in this position is that the problem is that this type of bias is a bias that we all have, independently of the gender of the fund. So at the of the person in the fund that is doing the question. So this is something I take your advice. I think it's very interesting of what would someone from a different gender would do, because it helps you at least to stop and think, not necessarily to solve it, but at least to take the time to say, would I ask this if it's a she or a he? Would I have this if I'm a he or a she? It's a good starting point. I really like it. So I will definitely take that one and I will start playing with that. Okay, so we are 37 minutes so far in the interview. This is amazing. I really like talking with you. I've been learning a lot. I am taking a lot new tools in my toolbox. So thank you very much. Before we finish, I would like to ask you if there anything that you would like to share with us that I forgot to ask you.
Well, I think that one thing I would just like to note is, I think I've made the case for why this is important, but I think that sometimes people also think that, and particularly early stage founders, feel like, well, speed is of the essence. And I would just sort of counter that resilience and innovation are absolutely key to a startup success. And resilience and innovation we see come from diversity of thought. And so I would love to encourage, and I think this applies across the board. It's not just a startup issue, right? Like in general, particularly our hiring processes and how we retain the talent. If we can attract diverse talent, then it becomes an issue of retention. But how are our hiring processes creating a self-fulfilling cycle in terms of, if you're just trying to hire as quickly as possible, you're just hiring from your own network. How can you expand beyond your network? And yes, it might take you an extra couple of weeks to find the right candidate, but I guarantee you it's worth it. It will be worth it.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Great points. Okay, so before we close, I have two extra questions. Can you share us a couple of books they would like people to read that you think that would help them? Two books that you read lately that you like.
Yeah. Even though we talked about this beforehand. I mean, there's so many books. I have been reading a lot through this pandemic. I'm a total bookworm. And I've been really trying to balance it between the sort of like fiction and nonfiction. As I mentioned, I'm on this path. I'm on a journey to sort of like re-educate myself. And so within that context, two of the books that I have found extremely helpful that I've read this year have been How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi and So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Oluo. And actually, specifically within the venture capital space, there's Arlen Hamilton's It's About Time, which is like a must read for everyone. If you have not read it, go get it right now. If you are more of an audiobook person, she narrates it. It's phenomenal. And there's so many resources in the back as well for emerging managers or people who would like to enter the VC space. So those
Yes,
are sort of like
I agree with you. She's outstanding. And yes, and I am an audiobook guy, so I really enjoyed it. Yes, totally agree. And a blog or podcast that you would suggest for the people?
let's see. Recently, I've started reading How to Fail with Elizabeth Day. Or sorry, I started listening to. I don't know if I said reading or not. It's a
No, no, I'm
podcast.
still here. Yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant. Yes, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's a podcast, How to Fail with Elizabeth Day. And I particularly recommend, she has 2 episodes with Mo Gaudat, who has been on a mission to make 1 billion people happier. And, you know, he actually used to work at Google. He was an executive at Google. And his whole journey, it's very inspiring. Every guest of hers has to share 3 failures, and it's a really good listen. I highly recommend it.
Brilliant, 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 brilliant. Megan, it's been great to talk with you in this way. We've been working together as Amazon Web Services and Inca Ventures as helping startups together, but this is a different way of meeting you. I love the startup that you invest on. I love helping you with our resources, but this is a new way of meeting you, and this was outstanding. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for all the candid comments and thoughts. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alfonso. This has been a pleasure. I hope we can do it again.
I hope so.